If you talk to any old school tabletop RPG fan, they will surely remember the name of a company called Palladium Games, or they may remember their more famous game, Rifts. But we're not going to be talking about Rifts just yet. Instead, I'd like to focus today on another title by the same company, Palladium Fantasy. My dog-eared copy is from 1996 and has seen quite a bit of use over the years. This is the second edition, which is a major improvement to the 1983 first edition. It still has the strong fantasy aesthetic of older RPGs from the 80s, but the second edition introduced its players to its Megaversal system, which I will talk about at the end of this video. Before we even get to the table of contents, there is a large print warning against violence in the occult practices, which may seem almost laughable now, but these were times when movies, music, video games, and tabletop RPGs were all being blamed for the troubles of the world. If you look closely, you can see here some of these characters are wearing sci-fi gear and even have what look to be laser rifles, which has more to do with Palladium's Megaversal system than the lore of Palladium Fantasy. The game doesn't bother telling you anything solid about the story or the lore, though, until you near the end of the book. In fact, all the playable races are listed at the very end. The characters it shows at the creation section include everything from a tiny little goblin-looking thing, which is actually a kobold in this setting, to a wolfman and a troll. There are other races that are playable, such as gnomes and Palladium Fantasy's version of a troglodyte as well. We are immediately struck with a plethora of acronyms, numbers, and percentages. To be honest, the complexity was somewhat intimidating when I first opened this book, but as we continue to read on, it reveals itself to be a quite simple but highly detailed system. It may not be as realistic as some other tabletop RPGs on the market when it comes to combat and violence, but that doesn't mean it can't be a brutal experience. The rate of recovery, for example, when a character is injured can only recover a small amount of hit points per day, which gradually increases over time. There are also optional rules that can increase difficulty and risk in a game. Optional recovery side effects from nearly dying, for example, include major scarring, impairment, and even brain damage. A lot of other games do have a better and more intricate difficulty scaling system within their printed rules, but Palladium does a decent enough job. Alignment is very similar to other tabletop RPGs out there. Palladium does introduce a unique selfish but not evil alignment, which I like the idea of, if only in theory. It also has a vast insanity section, which involves everything from neuroses to psychosis, with a sprinkling of drugs and addiction for good measure. This feature is great for adding more risk and even a bit of horror elements to a seemingly normal fantasy universe, making dungeons even more terrifying to traverse. The combat isn't anything particular to write home about. It feels somewhat similar to other old school RPGs. The detailing is what sets it apart, however. Palladium is a highly specific and highly detailed game, which for some can be very helpful. If you're the kind of DM or player who has a hard time spicing up combat with flourishes and gory descriptions, then the combat options here may inspire you. There are 6 different specific unarmed hand strikes, for example, 9 specific unarmed foot strikes, 4 specific grapple hold types, 8 specific kick strikes, and so much more. The specificity and detail is both mesmerizing and a little bit intimidating in this game. There's rules for magic and even psychic combat, just in case you wanted to go full scanners and burst your enemy's brains out with your mind. The skills are no less detailed, everything from sign language to dog breeding, espionage to arts and crafts. Herein is where we start to see that either you're going to love the highly specific nature of this rule set or you're going to find the constraints too tight. When you work with limitations, you're free to let your imagination roam. When there's too many choices and options, you may find yourself flipping the book's pages back and forth constantly, over and over again every single session. So games like Savage Worlds, for example, they are very loose with their rule system, and that allows you to kind of make the rules up as you go. This one, however, has a very specific rule set. However, they try to keep just about everything, every possible option in mind. The classes that you can play are your basic fantasy trope archetypes, and there are many options to choose from with the game's OCC types or occupational character classes. Personally, I find these to be somewhat lacking when compared to the detail of everything else in this book. What it falls short in terms of non-magical classes, it more than makes up for with its mages. Witches, wizards, warlocks, runes, wards, mystic symbols, summoning rituals, psionics, it has everything laid out for you in explicit detail, with illustrations and everything. It goes on to detail a bit of lore behind magic and the pursuit of it. It also covers magical paraphernalia such as scrolls, alchemy, etc., etc. Just to emphasize how in-depth the magic system is in this game, pages 100 to 264 of this some 300-odd page book are dedicated to everything from magic classes to magic items. If you want to play a game with a very elaborate and detailed magic system, this may be your game. If you and your group want to play something less sorcery and more sword, then there are many other better options out there than this one to satisfy that particular desire. The lore begins on page 277. It gives about one paragraph for very important details and lets the player create the rest. I'm sure there are probably other supplements out there that expand upon the lore, but I have yet to find any out in the wild. The lore focuses heavily on an event called the Elf-Dwarf War, but again gives very little in the way of detailed information. I think this was intentional, either to sell upcoming supplements and books in the future, or to just leave it vague enough for players to take the creation into their own hands. This is where I want to get more in depth about the Megaversal system. I know I made you wait this whole time before revealing what it is. The thing that I love about Palladium is that you can seamlessly merge any of its properties that use the Megaversal system. Do you want superheroes in your medieval fantasy world? How would super strength or lightning speed hold up in a world where magic and monsters are mundane? Well, you can try for yourself by using the Heroes Unlimited book. Want to add some Lovecraftian horror to your dungeons? Then add the Beyond the Supernatural book. Hell, while we're at it, have you ever wondered what it would be like if Macross, Robotech, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles ever crossed over? Well, Palladium has officially licensed systems just for that. You can truly let your imagination run wild with this system. And that's why I love it. I can say personally, I have had the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cross over into my homebrew superhero world more than a few times, even meeting their counterparts in my ripoff universe, the overgrown sewer samurai rats. Yeah, I know it's not as catchy. Unfortunately, due to the decline of tabletop RPGs in the late 90s and early 2000s, I don't see Palladium coming out with anything substantial in the years to come. Truth be told, there are other systems out there that do what Palladium initially sought out to do with its Megaverse system, and they do it better. RPGs like Savage Worlds let you build entire universes with ease. So if you wanted Macross, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Robotech to cross over, you could more than totally do that in Savage Worlds. However, the one thing Palladium brings to its somewhat limited multiverse is detail. It's a niche title and not one that everyone will enjoy, but those who do enjoy it will probably love it and remember it fondly for the rest of their lives.